Welcome to Ironwad Whispers, your corner for stories that hit the heart and spark the imagination. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Share your city or country down in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you're ready for a journey filled with twists, turns, and emotions that'll keep you hooked till the very end, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Once upon a time, a humble motel clerk stunned the world when one daring idea saved a billionaire's crumbling empire and changed both their lives forever. Jane Mitchell wiped down the lobby counter of the Riverside Motel for the third time that morning, her reflection barely visible in the worn Formica surface. At 24, she'd been working at the run-down establishment on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio for 6 years, ever since her father's death left her as the sole provider for her younger siblings. The motel, with its flickering neon sign and perpetually broken ice machine, was a far cry from glamorous, but it had taught Jane everything about hospitality from the ground up. She knew which rooms had the best water pressure, how to calm an angry guest at 3 a.m., and most importantly, how to make people feel valued even when they were paying $39 a night. The morning news droned on the small television behind the desk, something about Cage Hospitality International facing its worst quarter in history. Jane barely registered the name. The luxury hotel empire was as far removed from her world as the moon. She had more pressing concerns, like the fact that Room 12's air conditioner had died again, and Mr. Peterson, in Room 3, was 2 weeks behind on his weekly rate. As she grabbed her toolkit to tackle the AC unit, Jane had no idea that in less than 24 hours, her path would collide with that of Maxwell Cage himself, and that everything she'd learned in this forgotten motel would become the key to saving a $7 billion empire. The Riverside Motel had exactly one claim to fame. It was the last lodging option before the highway stretched empty for 60 miles. This peculiarity of geography meant that even the wealthy occasionally found themselves reluctantly checking in when weather or circumstances stranded them. That Tuesday evening brought a torrential downpour that would have impressed Noah himself, complete with flooding that closed the interstate in both directions. Jane watched through the rain-streaked windows as a parade of increasingly expensive cars pulled into their pothole-riddled parking lot, their drivers wearing expressions of horror and resignation in equal measure. Among them was a black Bentley that looked almost comical, parked between a rusted pickup truck and a sedan missing its rear bumper. The man who emerged held a newspaper over his head as he sprinted for the office, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles that immediately soaked through. "I need a room," he announced, water dripping from his expensive suit onto Jane's freshly mopped floor. She looked up from her registration book to find herself staring at Maxwell Cage, the same man whose face had been on the television that morning, though he looked considerably less composed now. "Sure thing," Jane replied, treating him no differently than any other waterlogged traveler. "That'll be $39, plus tax. Room 8 has the newest mattress, if you don't mind that the window sticks a little." Maxwell Cage had built his empire on the principle that luxury was the only acceptable standard. His hotels featured thread counts that required scientific notation and bathroom fixtures that cost more than most people's cars. Now, standing in a motel office that smelled faintly of industrial disinfectant and desperation, he experienced his first moment of genuine humility in 20 years. The girl behind the counter, her name tag, read Jane, in faded letters, didn't fawn over him or recognize his name when he handed over his platinum credit card. She simply processed his payment, handed him an actual metal key, not even a key card, and offered him a towel from a stack she kept behind the desk. "Power might go out if the storm gets worse," Jane informed him matter-of-factly, adding a small flashlight to his pile. If it does, there's a generator that'll kick in for the essential stuff. But you might want to charge your phone now. Vending machines around the corner if you need anything to eat. The Snickers bars are the freshest. Oh, and if the couple in room 7 gets too loud, just bang on the wall. They usually quiet down. Maxwell found himself oddly charmed by her practical efficiency. In his world, problems were hidden, not acknowledged up front. Yet here was this young woman treating a potential power outage like a minor inconvenience rather than a catastrophe, preparing him for reality rather than pretending it didn't exist. Room 8 of the Riverside Motel was, to put it generously, basic. The carpet was a color that had probably started as beige, but had evolved into something more complex through decades of foot traffic. The television required percussive maintenance to display anything beyond static, and the promised stuck window was indeed stuck. Yet as Maxwell sat on the surprisingly comfortable bed, Jane hadn't lied about the mattress. Eating a vending machine dinner while rain hammered the roof, he felt more present than he had in years. His phone, usually buzzing with crises and demands, was silent. The storm had knocked out cell towers. For the first time since he'd built his first hotel, he was simply a guest in someone else's establishment, experiencing hospitality from the ground up. The couple in room 7 did indeed get loud around midnight, and Maxwell found himself following Jane's advice, rapping on the thin wall with his knuckles. The immediate silence and muffled sorry that followed made him laugh, a real laugh, not the practiced chuckle he used in board meetings. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a direct human interaction with neighbors. In his penthouses and private suites, he was insulated from other guests by soundproofing and distance. Here, separated by nothing more than drywall and good manners, he was part of a temporary community of stranded travelers, all making the best of an imperfect situation. Unable to sleep, Maxwell ventured out to the vending machines around 2 a.m., where he found Jane restocking them with practiced efficiency. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. The beds take some getting used to if you're not familiar with the particular lumps. He found himself helping her load candy bars into the ancient machine, listening as she explained the delicate art of coaxing it to accept wrinkled dollar bills. "You have to smooth them just right," she demonstrated, "and feed them in at exactly the right speed. Too fast and it spits them back. Too slow and it thinks you're trying to cheat it." "How long have you worked here?" Maxwell asked, genuinely curious about this young woman who treated a barely functional vending machine like a temperamental but beloved pet. Jane shrugged, closing the machine with a key from her impressive key ring. 6 years, give or take. Started when I was 18, right after. She paused, then continued more quietly. After my dad died. My siblings needed stability, and Hank, he owns this place. He gave me a chance when nobody else would. No experience, no references, just desperation and a willingness to learn. She looked up at him then, seeming to really see him for the first time. "You're that hotel guy from the news, aren't you? The one whose company is in trouble." Maxwell stiffened, unaccustomed to such direct acknowledgement of his failures. But Jane's tone held no judgment, only the same matter-of-fact observation she'd applied to the motel's shortcomings. "Yes," he admitted, "though I prefer to think of it as a temporary setback." Jane snorted, a surprisingly indelicate sound. "That's what Hank said when the interstate bypass got approved." "Temporary setback, Janie, will bounce back." "That was 4 years ago." "Sometimes setbacks are just life's way of telling you to try something different." She headed back toward the office, pausing to add, "Your company's hotels are real pretty in the pictures, but pretty doesn't mean much if people can't afford to stay in them. Just saying." Back in his room, Maxwell found himself unable to dismiss Jane's words. His empire had been built on exclusivity, on creating spaces so rarefied that only the ultra-wealthy could access them. but lying on a $39 bed that was more comfortable than his orthopedic marvel at home, he wondered if he'd confused expensive with valuable. His hotels were architectural marvels, featured in design magazines and hosted by celebrities. But how many ordinary families had ever experienced his version of hospitality? How many had even considered it, only to be turned away by prices that exceeded monthly mortgage payments? The morning brought sunshine and the welcome news that the interstate had reopened. Maxwell found Jane in the office, looking exhausted but still cheerful as she checked out the parade of reluctant guests. When his turn came, she handed him a paper bag. "Road breakfast," she explained. "Couple of muffins from the gas station next door and a thermos of coffee. It's not fancy, but it'll get you where you're going." He tried to pay her for it, but she waved him off. "Hospitality doesn't stop at checkout," she said simply. "Safe travels, Mr. Cage. Hope things work out with your company." As his driver navigated the Bentley back onto the highway, Maxwell found himself thinking about Jane's parting words. Hospitality doesn't stop at checkout. When was the last time any of his hotels had sent a guest off with a bagged breakfast and genuine well-wishes? His properties had checkout procedures that rivaled military operations, designed to extract every possible dollar and ensure no amenity went uncharged. But Jane, working at a motel that epitomized the opposite of luxury, had demonstrated something his empire had lost touch with. The heart of hospitality wasn't about thread counts or bathroom fixtures. It was about caring for people when they were vulnerable, far from home, and in need of shelter. The board meeting that awaited Maxwell in Chicago was every bit as grim as he'd expected. Cage Hospitality International was hemorrhaging money. Occupancy rates were at historic lows, and 3 major properties were in foreclosure proceedings. His CFO, Harrison Blackwood, delivered the news with barely concealed satisfaction. Harrison had always resented Maxwell's control of the company, and the current crisis provided the perfect opportunity for a coup. "The numbers don't lie, Maxwell," Harrison said, sliding a brutal spreadsheet across the polished conference table. "We're over-leveraged, overpriced, and over. I've already had preliminary discussions with Pinnacle Holdings about a buyout. It's not ideal, but it'll salvage something for the shareholders." "Absolutely not," Maxwell said firmly, though he felt the ground shifting beneath him. Pinnacle Holdings was known for buying distressed luxury brands and stripping them for parts, keeping the names while gutting everything that made them special. "There has to be another way." Harrison's smile was razor-sharp. "Unless you've got a miracle in that briefcase, Maxwell, there isn't. We've tried everything. Marketing campaigns, celebrity endorsements, even those ridiculous influencer partnerships you insisted on. Nothing's working. People simply aren't willing to pay our prices anymore. Not in this economy. The era of ultra-luxury hospitality is over." The meeting dragged on for hours, each presentation more depressing than the last. Maxwell's hotels in Miami, Los Angeles, and New York were all operating at massive losses. The international properties were faring slightly better, but not enough to offset the domestic bleeding. By the time they broke for lunch, even Maxwell's most loyal board members were looking at Harrison with newfound interest. The vultures were circling, and Maxwell felt like a wounded lion watching his pride desert him. He excused himself to the bathroom, where he splashed cold water on his face and tried to think of solutions that didn't involve surrender. It was then that he remembered the paper bag Jane had given him, still sitting in his briefcase. He pulled it out, finding not just the promised muffins and coffee, but a small note written on Riverside Motel stationery. "Mr. Cage," it read, "I thought about what you said about temporary setbacks. My dad used to say that when you can't go through a wall, go around it. When we lost our highway traffic, We started catering to long-term residents who needed cheap weekly rates. Not glamorous, but it kept the lights on. Maybe your fancy hotels just need to remember that everybody needs a place to sleep, not just rich folks. Good luck, Jane. P.S. The blueberry muffin is fresher than the bran. Maxwell read the note 3 times, each time feeling like he was seeing his empire through new eyes. Jane was right. He'd built walls around his properties, invisible barriers of price and pretension that excluded 99% of potential guests. While he'd been focused on attracting the 1%, the other 90% had found alternatives, leaving his crystal palaces empty. The solution wasn't to sell to Pinnacle or chase after more celebrity endorsements. It was to tear down the walls, to make luxury accessible to people like Jane who worked hard and deserved beauty in their lives too. But how could he convince a board fixated on quarterly earnings to gamble on such a radical transformation? Returning to the conference room, Maxwell did something unprecedented. He told them about the Riverside Motel. He described the stuck window, the temperamental vending machine, and most importantly, Jane's philosophy of hospitality. "We've forgotten who we're supposed to be serving," he said, passion creeping into his voice. "We've created museums, not hotels. Places to be admired from afar, not lived in. What if we changed that? What if we made Cage hospitality about bringing luxury to everyone, not just the elite?" The room erupted in protests. Harrison actually laughed. "You want to turn our 5-star properties into motels? Have you completely lost your mind?" "Not motels," Maxwell countered, "but accessible luxury. Smaller rooms at lower prices, restaurants with both haute cuisine and comfort food, spas that offer both $1,000 treatments and $30 massages. We keep the quality but expand the accessibility. We become the first luxury brand that actually welcomes everyone." The board member from Texas, Sarah Chen, looked thoughtful. "It would require massive restructuring. We'd have to redesign our properties, retrain our staff, completely overhaul our booking systems. And we'd have to do it fast," Maxwell agreed. "Before Pinnacle or someone else forces a sale. I'm asking for 6 months. If I can't turn things around by then, I'll step down voluntarily." The vote was closer than Maxwell had hoped, 7-5, in favor of giving him 6 months. Harrison stormed out, muttering about shareholder lawsuits and fiduciary irresponsibility. But Maxwell had bought himself time. And more importantly, he'd found his North Star, Jane's simple philosophy that hospitality doesn't stop at checkout. Now, he just had to figure out how to implement a revolution across 47 properties in 6 months. As he left the boardroom, he made a mental note to send Jane a thank you card. Better yet, he thought, maybe he should offer her a consulting position. Something told him that the girl who could coax dollar bills into an ancient vending machine might have more insights about making his empire work. The renovation of Cage Hospitality began not with construction, but with Maxwell himself. He instituted what he called ground-level research, spending a week working incognito at various positions in his hotels. As a bellhop in Los Angeles, he discovered that the marble floors everyone admired were a nightmare for luggage carts. As a housekeeper in Miami, he learned that the designer bedspreads took so long to properly arrange that staff often skipped other cleaning tasks to meet their quotas. Each role revealed new inefficiencies, places where the pursuit of aesthetic perfection had trampled practical hospitality. His favorite discovery came while working the night shift at the Chicago property's front desk. A young couple, clearly on their honeymoon, had saved for months to afford one night in a basic room. Watching them try to hide their disappointment when they realized the advertised continental breakfast cost $80 extra broke Maxwell's heart. He comped their breakfast, earning a glare from the night manager, but the couple's joy reminded him why he'd started in hospitality in the first place. It wasn't about impressing the jaded wealthy. It was about creating magical moments for people who would remember them forever. Armed with insights from his underground research, Maxwell called an emergency meeting with his property managers. Instead of the usual corporate conference room, he held it at the Riverside Motel, buying out all 32 rooms for the weekend. His executives, accustomed to five-star accommodations, arrived in various states of shock and dismay. "Welcome to our new philosophy," Maxwell announced, standing in the modest breakfast area where Jane usually set out grocery store donuts and industrial coffee. "If we can't understand hospitality at this level, we have no business claiming to offer it at any level." The weekend was transformative. Maxwell paired each executive with a Riverside staff member, forcing them to see operations through the eyes of people who made hospitality work on a shoestring budget. Jane, who'd been promoted to weekend manager after the previous one quit, proved particularly insightful. She walked the CEO of the Miami property through the motel's books, showing how they stayed profitable despite charging less for a room than his hotel charged for parking. "The secret," she explained, "is remembering that every dollar matters to somebody. You treat a $39 customer with the same respect as a $3,000 one, they'll come back. Maybe they'll even save up to try something nicer if you give them a path to do it." By Sunday afternoon, even the most resistant executives were beginning to see the potential. The head of New York operations, a woman who hadn't stayed in anything less than 4 stars in 20 years, found herself genuinely impressed by Jane's system for managing long-term residents. "You've created a community," she observed. "These people look out for each other." Jane nodded. "When you can't afford to leave when things get tough, you learn to make wherever you are feel like home. Your hotels are so focused on being destinations that nobody thinks of them as home. That's what Mr. Cage is trying to change, right?" She looked at Maxwell for confirmation, and he felt a surge of gratitude for this young woman who understood his vision better than his Harvard-educated executives. The transformation began with the Chicago property, chosen because it was hemorrhaging the most money and had the least to lose. Maxwell hired Jane as a special consultant, giving her carte blanche to reimagine the guest experience. Her first decision shocked everyone. She converted 2 floors of luxury suites into what she called smart comfort rooms. Smaller spaces with ingenious storage solutions and all the amenities of larger rooms condensed into efficient layouts. "Think Japanese capsule hotels meet Scandinavian design," she explained to the skeptical architects. "Beautiful, functional, and half the price of our standard rooms." While construction crews worked on the physical transformation, Jane tackled the staff culture. She instituted Hospitality Heroes, a program where employees were rewarded not for upselling amenities, but for solving guest problems creatively. The valet, who helped a guest find an affordable local mechanic instead of pushing the hotel's overpriced car service, got the same recognition as the concierge, who secured reservations at exclusive restaurants. "We're not just selling rooms," Jane told a staff meeting. "We're selling the feeling of being taken care of. That doesn't always mean the most expensive option. Sometimes it means the right option." The restaurant overhaul proved the most controversial. Jane insisted on a dual menu system, the existing haute cuisine, alongside what she called comfort classics, high-quality versions of familiar foods at accessible prices. The executive chef nearly quit when she suggested adding a really good burger to his Michelin-starred menu. "This is culinary sacrilege," he protested. Jane's response was to bring in her younger sister, Amy, who'd been working as a line cook at a local diner. Amy cooked the chef her signature burger, a perfect blend of chuck and brisket with house-made pickles and a brioche bun that would make angels weep. After one bite, the chef not only agreed to the dual menu, but asked Amy to join his team. 3 months into the transformation, the Chicago property unveiled its new identity. The grand reopening featured something unprecedented in luxury hotel history. A lottery system where ordinary families could win weekend stays in the remaining premium suites. Jane had insisted that real people, not just travel journalists and influencers, should be the first to experience the new Cage hospitality. The lobby, once an intimidating expanse of marble and crystal, now featured comfortable seating areas where guests actually lingered. The smart comfort rooms, priced at a third of traditional rates, sold out within hours of becoming available. Maxwell watched from the mezzanine as families who'd never dreamed of staying in a luxury hotel explored the transformed space with wonder. A single mother was nearly in tears when she realized the children's play area meant she could actually relax while her kids were safely entertained. A construction worker, still in his work boots, sat in the lobby bar enjoying a beer from the new local favorites tap list, no longer made to feel unwelcome by astronomical prices and dress codes. This was what Jane had been trying to tell him that night at the riverside. Hospitality wasn't about exclusion. It was about inclusion. The numbers from the first month were staggering. Occupancy jumped from 42% to 87%. The restaurant, now serving both sophisticated tasting menus and Amy's incredible burgers, saw revenue triple. Most surprisingly, the premium suites actually became more desirable. With the hotel full of diverse, interesting guests, instead of the same rotating cast of business travelers, the atmosphere was vibrant and alive. Travel bloggers who'd ignored Cage properties for years suddenly couldn't get enough of the democratic luxury concept. Cage for everyone became a trending hashtag. Harrison Blackwood, however, was not pleased. At the quarterly board meeting, he attacked the Chicago numbers with the determination of a prosecutor. "These rates are unsustainable," he insisted. "You're cannibalizing our premium offerings. What happens when the novelty wears off?" Jane, who'd been invited to present her expansion plans, stood up to answer. Maxwell had worried about putting her in front of the hostile board, but Jane faced them with the same calm practicality she'd shown that first stormy night. "Mr. Blackwood, have you ever saved up for something special? Really saved? Putting aside money you could have used for other things because you wanted one perfect experience?" Without waiting for an answer, Jane continued. "That's what most people do when they choose a hotel for a special occasion. They save, they plan, they hope it'll be worth it. But your hotels, the old version, they made people feel like they'd made a mistake the moment they walked in. Everything extra cost more than their room. They left feeling cheated, not cherished. Now, our smart comfort guests are already booking return visits. Half of them are upgrading to standard rooms for special occasions. We're not cannibalizing. We're cultivating. We're growing customers who'll climb our ladder as their circumstances improve, instead of writing us off after one overpriced disappointment." Sarah Chen from Texas raised her hand. "What about our reputation? Cage hospitality has always meant exclusivity. Won't this dilution damage our brand?" Jane pulled up a presentation she'd prepared. "Let me show you something interesting. Our guest satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in a decade. But here's the really cool part. They're highest among our premium suite guests. You know why? Because exclusivity is more valuable when it's earned, not bought. Our suite guests love that they're staying somewhere that values all people, not just the wealthy. It makes their choice feel ethical, not just indulgent. We're not diluting the brand, we're evolving it." The meeting stretched on for hours, but Jane held her ground against every objection. She had numbers, testimonials, and most importantly, a vision that was already proving itself in Chicago. When Harrison tried to dismiss her lack of formal business education, she smiled. "You're right. I don't have an MBA, but I've got 6 years of making a failing motel profitable and 1 year of turning around your flagship property. I'll take real-world results over theoretical knowledge any day. Even Harrison's allies on the board had to admit the transformation was working, though they insisted on seeing results from multiple properties before fully committing. With board approval to expand to 5 more properties, Jane and Maxwell developed what they called the cascade strategy. Instead of trying to transform all locations simultaneously, they would renovate properties in waves, using staff from transformed hotels to train those at the next wave. Jane insisted on promoting from within whenever possible, elevating housekeepers to supervisors and desk clerks to managers. These people already understand hospitality from the ground up, she explained. They just need someone to believe in them. The approach created fierce loyalty among staff and a consistency of service that no amount of corporate training could replicate. The second wave included properties in Denver, Atlanta, and Seattle. Each location presented unique challenges, but Jane's hands-on approach and willingness to listen to local staff made the transition smoother than anyone expected. In Denver, they partnered with local ski resorts to offer affordable packages that included transportation and equipment rental. In Atlanta, they turned unused conference rooms into co-working spaces for local entrepreneurs, creating a vibrant business community within the hotel. Seattle's transformation included a partnership with local coffee roasters and food trucks, bringing authentic local flavor to the property. Jane's personal life during this whirlwind transformation was practically non-existent. She'd moved to a small apartment in Chicago to be close to the flagship property, video calling her siblings daily, but rarely making it home to Ohio. Amy had joined her, taking on increasing responsibility in the restaurant transformations, but their brother Mike remained in Columbus, finishing high school. Jane sent most of her consulting fees home, ensuring Mike had everything he needed for college applications. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was revolutionizing luxury hospitality while living on takeout and sleeping on a second-hand couch. Maxwell noticed Jane's exhaustion during one of their late-night strategy sessions. They were reviewing plans for the Los Angeles transformation when she actually fell asleep mid-sentence, her head dropping onto the stack of architectural drawings. Instead of waking her, Maxwell covered her with his suit jacket and continued working quietly. When she woke an hour later, mortified, he waved off her apologies. "You're pouring everything into saving my company," he said gently. "The least I can do is let you nap on my conference table. But Jane, you need to take care of yourself too. This revolution won't work if its architect burns out." "I'm fine," Jane insisted, though the dark circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "We're so close to proving this can work. Harrison's just waiting for us to stumble so he can push his buyout plan." "I won't let that happen." Maxwell studied her with concern. In the year since that night at the riverside, Jane had become indispensable not just to the company transformation, but to his own evolution as a leader. She'd taught him to see past spreadsheets to the human stories they represented, to value innovation over tradition, and most importantly, to remember that business success meant nothing if it didn't improve people's lives. "What drives you?" Maxwell asked suddenly. "It's not the money. You send most of it home. It's not fame. You actively avoid the press. So what is it?" Jane was quiet for a long moment, fidgeting with a pencil. "My dad died because we couldn't afford good health insurance," she finally said. "He needed treatment we couldn't pay for, so he just didn't get it. Watching him pretend he wasn't in pain so we wouldn't worry. Seeing him work until he literally couldn't tea-stand anymore. I swore I'd never let money be the reason someone couldn't access what they needed. Your hotels were like that. Beautiful things only rich people could touch. Making them accessible, showing that everyone deserves beauty and comfort. That feels like honoring my dad somehow. The Los Angeles transformation launched on a spectacular California morning, with lines of eager guests stretching around the block. Jane had insisted on keeping some rooms at the original ultra-luxury level while adding smart comfort options and mid-tier selections she called Sweet Spot Suites. The tiered system allowed guests to choose their experience based on budget without feeling relegated to a lesser class of service. Everyone had access to the same amenities: pools, restaurants, spas, with pricing structures that made them actually usable. A $30 spa express service sat alongside $1,000 full-day packages, and both customers were treated with equal respect. The innovation that captured the most attention was Locals Night. Every Wednesday, neighborhood residents could enjoy hotel amenities at drastically reduced prices. The pool deck transformed into a community gathering space. The restaurant offered special local menus, and the bar featured drinks named after neighborhood landmarks. It was Jane's answer to the criticism that luxury hotels created dead zones in urban neighborhoods, taking up space without giving back. Now, Cage properties were becoming community hubs, places where locals and travelers mingled naturally. 6 months from Maxwell's desperate board promise, Cage Hospitality International's numbers told a story of resurrection. Overall occupancy had risen from 51% to 84%. Revenue, despite lower room rates, was up 23% thanks to increased volume and guests actually using amenities they could afford. Staff turnover had plummeted, and customer satisfaction scores were through the roof. The transformation was working, but more importantly, it was sustainable. Unlike artificial boosts from marketing campaigns or celebrity endorsements, this growth came from fundamental changes in how the company operated. The crucial board meeting took place on a sunny Thursday in September. Harrison Blackwood came armed with skepticism and spreadsheets, determined to find flaws in the miracle. But as presentation after presentation showed consistent success across all transformed properties, his objections grew increasingly desperate. "What about our international properties?" he demanded. "This American populism might work domestically, but our Paris and London hotels cater to a different clientele entirely." Jane was ready for this. "Actually, our international managers have been begging to implement similar changes. Turns out accessibility is a universal desire, not just an American one." When the vote came, it was unanimous. Even Harrison reluctantly voted to continue the transformation. The success was undeniable, and several board members privately admitted they'd been wrong to doubt Maxwell's vision. Sarah Chen pulled Jane aside after the meeting. "I owe you an apology," she said. "When Maxwell first told us about you, I thought he'd lost his mind. A motel manager revolutionizing luxury hospitality. It sounded like a bad movie plot. But you've done something I've never seen in 30 years of business. You've made capitalism feel humanitarian. That's a hell of an achievement." With the board's full support, the transformation accelerated. Properties in New York, San Francisco, and Boston underwent rapid renovations. Each maintained its unique character while embracing the accessibility philosophy. The New York property partnered with Broadway theaters to offer affordable pre-show dinners and late-night dessert specials. San Francisco created tech-free retreats for burned-out startup workers alongside its business facilities. Boston's historical tours, once exclusive to suite guests, became available to everyone with sliding-scale pricing based on group size and timing. Jane finally took a week off at Maxwell's insistence, returning to Ohio to surprise Mike at his high school graduation. Sitting in the crowded gymnasium, watching her baby brother walk across the stage, she felt the full weight of the journey. 3 years ago, she'd been convinced they'd lose everything after their father's death. Now, Mike was headed to Ohio State on a full scholarship. Amy was apprenticing under a Michelin-starred chef, and Jane herself had somehow become one of the most influential voices in American hospitality. It seemed impossible, like someone else's life she'd accidentally stepped into. The graduation party was held at the Riverside Motel, which had become something of a legend in hospitality circles as the birthplace of the Cage transformation. Hank, the owner, had refused all buyout offers, content to run his little motel exactly as he always had. "Not everything needs to be fancy," he told Jane, as they watched Mike and his friends playing cornhole in the parking lot. "Sometimes people just need a clean bed and someone who gives a damn. You taught that to the fancy folks, Janie. That's worth more than all the money they've thrown at you." Jane's return to Chicago coincided with a crisis. A major travel publication was preparing an exposé on the democratization of cage hospitality, and early leaks suggested it wasn't flattering. The article apparently argued that by making luxury accessible, Cage had destroyed what made it special. Several anonymous sources, Jane suspected Harrison's influence, claimed staff morale was actually down, and that premium guests were fleeing to truly exclusive competitors. Maxwell was panicked, knowing that perception could destroy their progress regardless of reality. "We need to respond," he said, pacing his office. "Maybe a counter-article? Or we could invite the journalist to see our properties firsthand." "Or," Jane suggested calmly, "we could let our guests respond for us." She'd learned that fighting negative press directly often backfired. Instead, she proposed something radical, a Cage Stories campaign where real guests shared their experiences. Within days, social media flooded with testimonials. A teacher from Kansas wrote about taking her first real vacation in years. A small business owner shared how the affordable conference facilities had let him host a company retreat that transformed his team. Most powerfully, a formerly homeless veteran described how a Cage property manager had hired him when no one else would, giving him a chance to rebuild his life. The organic response overwhelmed the negative article. Major news outlets picked up the Cage stories, turning what could have been a PR disaster into a triumph. The journalist who'd written the exposé actually published a follow-up admitting she'd been wrong, praising Cage for proving that inclusivity and excellence weren't mutually exclusive. "In an era of increasing inequality," she wrote, "Cage hospitality has done something revolutionary. They've made luxury a choice, not a privilege. They've democratized beauty, comfort, and exceptional service." If that's not worth celebrating, what is? The one-year anniversary of Jane's hiring as a consultant was marked with little fanfare. She was too busy planning the next phase of expansion. International properties were beginning their transformations, and Jane was scheduled to fly to Paris the following week. But Maxwell insisted on acknowledging the date, gathering the executive team in the Chicago property's new community space. "1 year ago," he began, "Jane Mitchell saved this company, not with an MBA or decades of experience, but with something far more valuable, the radical idea that everyone deserves to be treated like they matter." He turned to Jane, who was characteristically trying to blend into the background. "Jane, you've shown us that true luxury isn't about exclusion. It's about making people feel valued, heard, and welcome. You've transformed not just our properties, but our entire philosophy. Cage hospitality isn't just profitable again, it's meaningful. That's entirely your doing." The room erupted in applause, and Jane felt her cheeks burn. She still wasn't comfortable with praise, preferring to redirect attention to the team efforts. But as she looked around the room at colleagues who'd become friends, at a company that had become a cause, she allowed herself a moment of pride. The Paris transformation faced unique challenges. The property, a converted 18th century mansion, had always traded on its aristocratic atmosphere. The French management team was skeptical about Jane's accessibility philosophy, arguing the Parisian expectations were different. Jane spent her first week simply observing, staying in a smart comfort prototype room and eating in the staff cafeteria. She discovered something fascinating. The housekeeping staff, many of whom had worked there for decades, had never been allowed to bring their families to see the beautiful spaces they maintained. The disconnect between those who worked in luxury and those who enjoyed it was even starker than in America. Her solution was elegant in its simplicity. She instituted patrimoine partage, shared heritage days where hotel staff could invite family and friends to enjoy the property's restaurants, gardens, and historic spaces at nominal prices. The first event was magical. Children of housekeepers played in the same gardens where celebrities strolled, while maintenance workers proudly showed their spouses the intricate restoration work they'd done. The Parisian press, always ready to sneer at American capitalism, instead found themselves charmed by this acknowledgement that luxury spaces belonged to everyone who made them possible. The smart comfort rooms in Paris were designed with French aesthetics, smaller spaces that emphasized quality over quantity, with clever built-ins and perfect lighting. Jane worked with local designers to ensure nothing felt American or imposed. The restaurant changes were subtle too. The Michelin-starred dining room remained, but added a casual bistro that served elevated versions of traditional French comfort food at reasonable prices. The biggest innovation was partnering with local universities to offer student rates during off-peak times, turning empty rooms into affordable housing for international students. Meanwhile, back in the States, Harrison Blackwood was orchestrating his final play. He'd been quietly buying shares and building alliances, planning a hostile takeover that would reverse Jane's reforms and return Cage to its exclusive roots. His argument was seductive to certain shareholders. While profitability had improved, the stock price hadn't risen as dramatically as some hoped. "We're leaving money on the table," Harrison argued in secret meetings. "Why settle for many small profits when we could return to fewer, larger ones?" "This experiment has run its course," Jane learned about the threat from an unexpected source, Harrison's own assistant, who'd been won over by the company's transformation. "He's planning to call for a vote of no confidence in Maxwell at the annual shareholders' meeting," she warned over coffee. "He says he has enough votes to force Maxwell out and install himself as CEO. First thing he'll do is end all the accessibility programs." Jane felt her stomach drop. They'd worked so hard, changed so many lives. Could it all be undone by one bitter man's ambition? She thanked the assistant and immediately went to find Maxwell. Maxwell took the news with surprising calm. "I've been expecting this," he admitted. "Harrison's never forgiven me for choosing your vision over his. But Jane, we've got something he doesn't. Proof that doing the right thing is also the profitable thing. We just need to make sure the shareholders see it." Together, they began preparing for the fight of their professional lives. Jane reached out to every transformed property, gathering data and stories. Maxwell worked his network, reminding longtime allies why they'd believed in him. But both knew the ultimate decision would come down to cold, hard numbers. The annual shareholders' meeting was held at the New York property, its transformed spaces serving as a living testament to Jane's vision. Harrison came prepared with slick presentations showing how much more profit they could extract by returning to exclusivity. His vision was clear: fewer guests paying much more, staff reduced to skeleton crews, amenities priced to maximize revenue rather than encourage use. "We've proven the model works," he argued. "Now it's time to optimize it for shareholder value, not social experiments." When Jane's turn came to present, she didn't start with numbers. Instead, she told the story of Miguel, a maintenance worker at the Los Angeles property who'd used the employee education program to get his engineering degree. Of Sarah, a single mother from Denver whose kids attended the hotel's affordable after-school program while she worked at a nearby hospital. Of the Thompson family, who'd saved for 2 years to celebrate their parents' 50th anniversary at a Cage property and left feeling like royalty despite staying in a smart comfort room. "This is what we're building," she said. "Not just profits, but possibilities. Not just returns, but relationships." Then she showed the numbers. Not just the improved revenues and occupancy rates, but the predictive models showing long-term growth. Harrison's plan would generate a short-term spike, she acknowledged. But it's not sustainable. We've built something different. A customer base that spans economic levels, that grows with us, that brings their children and grandchildren. We're not just a luxury hotel company anymore. We're a hospitality ecosystem. And ecosystems, when properly nurtured, don't just survive. They thrive indefinitely. The vote was agonizingly close. Harrison had done his work well, convincing many shareholders that Jane's approach, while admirable, was ultimately bad business. But Maxwell had one final card to play. He'd spent the previous weeks quietly reaching out to a new type of investor: social impact funds that valued sustainable, ethical business models. When the votes were tallied, Maxwell retained control by a margin of less than 2%. Harrison left immediately. His parting shot a promise that this socialist experiment will collapse within 5 years. With the existential threat past, Jane and Maxwell could focus on the future. The international rollout accelerated, with properties in London, Tokyo, and Dubai embracing localized versions of the accessibility model. Each market required different approaches. Tokyo's transformation included capsule-style rooms that made luxury hyper-efficient, while Dubai created cultural exchange programs that brought together its diverse population. The common thread was Jane's insistence that hospitality meant welcoming everyone, not just the wealthy. Back home, Amy had become a culinary force in her own right, developing affordable fine dining concepts that were being adopted across all properties. Mike was studying hospitality management at Ohio State, bringing fresh ideas from his generation. "You should franchise the model," he suggested during a family dinner. "Not the hotels, the philosophy. Teach other companies how to transform themselves. Call it the Riverside method or something." Jane laughed, but the seed was planted. Could their revolution spread beyond Cage hospitality? The idea evolved into the Cage Institute for Inclusive Hospitality, offering training and certification for hotels wanting to adopt accessibility models. Jane insisted it be priced affordably, with scholarships for smaller properties. "We're not trying to get rich off this," she explained to a skeptical Maxwell. "We're trying to change an industry." The first class included everyone from boutique hotel owners to major chain representatives. Jane taught alongside professors from top hospitality schools, but her sessions, practical, honest, and grounded in real experience, were the most popular. Year 2 of the transformation brought unexpected recognition. Jane was named to numerous 40 under 40 lists and invited to speak at Davos about inclusive capitalism. She declined most invitations, uncomfortable with personal celebrity. "I'm not the story," she insisted. "The story is thousands of employees and millions of guests who proved that business can be both profitable and humane." But her reluctance only enhanced her reputation. In an era of self-promoting thought leaders, Jane's authenticity stood out. A documentary filmmaker approached about telling the Cage transformation story, and this time Maxwell convinced her to agree. The documentary, titled Room for Everyone, followed 3 families experiencing Cage properties for the first time. A Mexican-American family celebrating their daughter's quinceañera, a retired couple using their savings for a dream anniversary trip, and a young entrepreneur hosting her first business meeting in professional spaces she could actually afford. Interwoven with their stories was the journey of transformation, including footage from that first night at the Riverside Motel. Jane cringed watching herself on screen, but audiences loved the honest portrayal of how one person's insight had revolutionized an industry. Oscar night brought surreal moments. Room for Everyone was nominated for Best Documentary Feature. Jane attended reluctantly, wearing a dress her sister picked out and feeling like an imposter among Hollywood elite. But when the film won and the director insisted she join him on stage, something shifted. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience that included some of the world's most influential people, Jane realized her discomfort with recognition was a luxury she couldn't afford. If telling her story inspired others to challenge exclusive systems, she had an obligation to tell it. 3 years ago, I was wiping down counters at a roadside motel, Jane said, her voice steady despite her nerves. Tonight, I'm here because we proved something important, that making beautiful things accessible doesn't diminish them, it enhances them. That treating every person like they matter isn't just morally right, it's good business. That sometimes the best innovations come not from boardrooms, but from the people doing the work. I accept this honor on behalf of everyone who's ever been told they don't belong in beautiful spaces. You do belong, and we're going to keep opening doors until everyone knows it. The speech went viral, inspiring countless businesses to reconsider their accessibility policies. Jane received thousands of messages from hotel workers sharing their own ideas for transformation. She tried to respond to as many as possible, often connecting people with similar ideas to collaborate. The Cage Institute expanded to include online courses, making the methodology available globally. Properties from Bali to Barcelona began implementing smart comfort rooms and community engagement programs, always with local twists that reflected their unique contexts. Year 3 brought personal changes alongside professional growth. Maxwell, inspired by Jane's example, stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic vision and mentorship. "You've taught me that leadership isn't about control," he told her during a transition meeting. "It's about empowering others to achieve what you couldn't imagine alone." He promoted Jane to Chief Innovation Officer, a role that let her split time between operations and developing new concepts. Her first initiative was a partnership with community colleges to create apprenticeship programs, providing pathways into hospitality careers for people without traditional education backgrounds. The apprenticeship program's first graduate was Marcus Williams, a former gang member from Chicago's South Side, who discovered a talent for hotel operations. Jane mentored him personally, seeing echoes of her own hunger to prove herself. When he was promoted to assistant manager of the Chicago property within 18 months, the celebration felt like a family affair. "You saved my life," Marcus told Jane, tears in his eyes. "No," Jane corrected. "You saved your own life. I just made sure the door was open when you were ready to walk through it." Competition began embracing accessibility models, which Jane viewed as victory rather than threat. "We didn't do this to corner a market," she reminded nervous board members. "We did it to change an industry. Every hotel that becomes more accessible validates our approach." Cage hospitality remained the gold standard, though, because Jane insisted on continuous innovation. Properties began featuring makerspaces where local artisans could sell their work, health clinics that served both guests and community members, and even small libraries curated by local bookstores. The 5-year Mark Harrison had predicted for collapse came and went with Cage hospitality stronger than ever. The company had expanded to 60 properties across 15 countries, each profitable and beloved by its community. Employment had doubled, with industry-leading retention rates and internal promotion statistics. Most satisfying to Jane was the diversity data. Cage employed and served people from every economic background, creating spaces where CEOs and students, celebrities and construction workers all felt equally welcome. A surprise visit to the Riverside Motel for Jane's 5-year work anniversary revealed how far ripples of change had spread. Hank had made modest improvements, new mattresses, better lighting, functioning ice machines, but maintained the property's essential character. "You showed everyone that fancy doesn't equal good," he told Jane over coffee in the same office where she'd once worked 18-hour days. "Now even the big chains are trying to be more authentic. Of course, most of them are faking it, but at least they're trying." That evening, Maxwell organized a celebration at the Chicago property. Staff from every level attended, including many who'd been part of the original transformation. Jane was overwhelmed by stories of how the accessibility philosophy had changed lives. Employees who'd advanced their careers, guests who'd created precious memories they couldn't otherwise afford, communities that had been revitalized by inclusive anchor businesses. "This is your legacy," Maxwell told her. "Not the buildings or the profits, but the proof that business can be a force for inclusion rather than exclusion." Jane's response was characteristic. She redirected attention to others, highlighting team members who'd made the vision reality. But when pushed to reflect on the journey, she returned to her father's memory. "He would have loved this," she said quietly. "Not the fancy parts, he never cared about that, but knowing that work could mean something, that you could build something that helped people while still being successful. That would have made him proud." The room was silent, everyone understanding that the revolution they'd been part of was, at its heart, a daughter's tribute to a father who'd taught her that everyone deserved dignity. Looking back, the transformation of Cage Hospitality seemed inevitable, but Jane knew how many moments of doubt and crisis they'd navigated. Every decision to prioritize accessibility over exclusivity had been a risk. Every investment in community over pure profit had required defending. But they'd proved that sustainable success came not from extracting maximum value from each transaction, but from creating environments where everyone could thrive. The numbers bore this out. Cage's stock had tripled since the transformation began, validating Jane's belief that doing right and doing well weren't contradictory. The final board meeting of Year 5 included a presentation that would have been unimaginable at the beginning. Cage Hospitality was now the world's largest luxury hotel employer, the most profitable company in its sector, and ranked first in customer satisfaction across all demographic categories. More importantly, it had sparked a global movement toward inclusive hospitality. Business schools taught the Cage transformation as a case study. Governments consulted on using hospitality to bridge social divides. The girl who'd collapsed from exhaustion trying to save her family had helped save an entire industry from its own exclusivity. "Where do we go from here?" a board member asked. Jane smiled, thinking of all the barriers still to break, all the people still excluded from beautiful spaces. "We keep opening doors," she said simply. "We keep proving that everyone belongs in the places we create. We keep showing that hospitality isn't about impressing people, it's about caring for them. And we never, ever forget that our success comes not from the thread count of our sheets, but from the quality of our welcome." The board voted unanimously to continue the mission, to push accessibility even further, to keep revolutionizing what luxury could mean. That night, Jane stood on the roof of the Chicago property, looking out over a city she'd helped transform. 5 years ago, she'd been nobody, a motel clerk whose father had died too young and whose family had been hanging on by threads. Now she was somebody, but more importantly, she'd helped make thousands of other nobodies into somebodies too. Every smart comfort room occupied by a family on their first real vacation, every local hired into a job with real advancement potential, every community program that brought neighbors together. They were all threads in a tapestry of change she'd never imagined weaving. Maxwell joined her on the roof, Bringing 2 cups of coffee from the machine Jane had insisted they install in the executive break room, the fancy espresso maker remained. But sometimes people just wanted regular coffee. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing a question they'd pondered throughout the journey. Jane thought carefully. "I regret that my dad never got to see this, that there are still so many places where people are made to feel small, that it took a crisis for your industry to realize exclusion was bad business." She paused, then smiled. "But no real regrets. We did something good here, Maxwell. Something that matters." As they stood there, phones began buzzing with news. Another major hotel chain was announcing its own accessibility initiative, explicitly crediting the cage model as inspiration. Jane felt a familiar mix of pride and determination. The revolution was spreading, but there was still so much work to do. Hotels were just the beginning. What about restaurants that priced out working families? Museums that felt forbidding to anyone without an art degree? Concert halls where regular people couldn't afford to hear beautiful music? Every exclusive space was an opportunity for transformation. "What's next?" Maxwell asked, reading her expression. Jane's eyes sparkled with possibility. "Remember what I said about keeping doors open? Well, I've been thinking. Hotels were just the first door. There are so many other industries that need to learn what we've proven. What if we created a consulting firm that helped any business become more inclusive? Not just hospitality, but retail, entertainment, healthcare, everything. We could call it Open Doors Consulting or something like that." Maxwell laughed, already seeing the vision. "And I suppose you already have a business plan sketched out on a napkin somewhere." Jane pulled a folded paper from her pocket, covered in her careful handwriting. "Actually, it's on Riverside Motel stationery. Seemed appropriate, since that's where all the best ideas start." They spent the next hour on the roof, planning a future where the lessons of inclusion could spread beyond hotels to transform how businesses thought about serving people. It was ambitious, probably impossible, definitely risky. But then, so had been the idea of a motel clerk saving a billionaire's empire. And look how that had turned out. 5 years later, Open Doors Consulting had helped transform dozens of industries. The girl from the Riverside Motel had become one of the most influential business voices in America, though she still preferred working behind the scenes to giving speeches. Cage hospitality continued to thrive, its model copied but never quite replicated because competitors missed the crucial ingredient: genuine care for every human who walked through their doors. And somewhere in Ohio, the Riverside Motel still charged $39 a night, still had a vending machine that required coaxing, and still had a small plaque by the office door that read, "Birthplace of a Revolution." Jane's story proved that heroes don't always wear capes or arrive with fanfare. Sometimes they're exhausted young women doing their best with impossible circumstances. Sometimes salvation comes not from expertise but from empathy, not from credentials but from courage. She'd saved Maxwell's company, but more than that, she'd saved its soul. She'd reminded an entire industry that hospitality wasn't about things, thread counts, marble lobbies, celebrity chefs, but about people. About making everyone feel valuable, welcome, and worthy of beauty. The transformation complete, Jane finally took a real vacation. She booked a smart comfort room at the Paris property, bringing her siblings to see the city she'd helped transform. Watching Amy marvel at the kitchen where she'd trained, and Mike practice his French with the staff, Jane felt a deep satisfaction. They'd come so far from those desperate days after their father's death. Not just financially, though the security was nice, but in their ability to create change, to matter in the world. Their father had died thinking he was nobody special, just another working man ground down by circumstances. His children had proved that nobody was nobody. that everyone had the potential to revolutionize their world. On their last night in Paris, the hotel manager insisted on upgrading them to the penthouse suite. Jane protested. She was perfectly happy in her smart comfort room, but the manager wouldn't budge. "You gave us back our purpose," he said simply. "This is the least we can do." As Jane stood on the balcony overlooking the city of light, Amy and Mike beside her, she thought about journeys and destinations. She'd started out trying to save her family and ended up saving a company. Maxwell had started out trying to save his company and ended up saving his soul. Together, they'd proved that business could be both profitable and humane, that success didn't require stepping on others to climb higher. "You did it, Jane," Mike said quietly, putting his arm around his sister. "You actually changed the world." Jane shook her head. "We did it, all of us. Every person who believed things could be different. Every employee who embraced change. Every guest who took a chance on something new. Change doesn't come from one person. It comes from communities deciding together that the old way isn't good enough." But even as she deflected credit, Jane knew she'd played her part. She'd been the spark that lit the fire, the voice that articulated what others had felt but couldn't express. She'd taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, her struggle into strength. The next morning brought news that would have seemed impossible just years before. Harrison Blackwood wanted to meet. He'd started his own hotel company after leaving Cage, built on the exclusive model he championed. It had failed spectacularly, unable to attract either investors excited by Cage's inclusive success or customers increasingly conscious of where they spent their money. Now he wanted to learn, to understand how he'd been so wrong. Jane agreed to meet him, not out of kindness, but because she believed even Harrison could change if given the chance. They met at the Riverside Motel, Jane's choice. Harrison looked deeply uncomfortable in the modest office, but he'd lost the arrogance that once defined him. "I was wrong," he said without preamble. "I thought business was about maximizing extraction from every interaction. You proved it's about maximizing value for everyone involved. I want to learn. Will you teach me?" It was a humbling moment for everyone. Jane agreed to let Harrison attend the Cage Institute, starting with the basic courses alongside other students. Redemption, she believed, should be as accessible as everything else. The story of Jane and Maxwell became business legend, taught in schools and recounted in boardrooms. But the real legacy lived in the thousands of lives changed by inclusive policies, the millions of memories made possible by accessibility, the countless businesses that learned to open their doors wider. Jane never sought fame or fortune. She found both anyway. But what mattered to her was the knowledge that somewhere, a family was checking into a beautiful hotel they could afford, feeling welcomed and valued. That somewhere, a worker was being promoted based on talent rather than pedigree. That somewhere, communities were coming together in spaces that had once divided them. Years later, when asked to summarize her philosophy, Jane returned to that first night at the Riverside. "Hospitality doesn't stop at checkout," she said. "It doesn't stop at the door, or the price point, or the social class. Real hospitality recognizes that every person who comes to you is carrying burdens you can't see, fighting battles you don't know about. Your job is to lighten their load, even if just for a moment. Do that consistently, and you don't just build a business, you build a better world." The humble girl from Ohio had become a hero not through strength or genius, but through empathy and determination. She'd saved a billionaire's company from bankruptcy, but more importantly, she'd saved it from irrelevance. In making luxury accessible, she'd made it meaningful. In opening doors for others, she'd opened possibilities for entire industries. And in refusing to accept that some people deserved beauty while others didn't, she'd rewritten the rules of American business. Jane Mitchell, the motel clerk who became a revolutionary, proved that true power comes not from keeping others out, but from inviting everyone in. Her story reminds us that transformation is possible, that the right person at the right moment can change everything. It shows that wisdom doesn't require degrees, that leadership doesn't require titles, and that the most profound revolutions begin with simple truths. Jane saw what others missed, that exclusivity was weakness disguised as strength, that accessibility was the future hiding in plain sight. She saved cage hospitality, not by making it more exclusive, but by making it more human. And in doing so, she didn't just save a company. She sparked a movement that continues to ripple outward, touching lives and opening doors that had been closed for far too long. The billionaire had thought he was rescuing a struggling girl from a roadside motel. Instead, she rescued him from a failing philosophy and a dying business model. Together they proved that the most unlikely partnerships can produce the most extraordinary results, that wisdom comes from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the humblest among us have the power to transform empires. Jane's journey from the Riverside Motel to the global stage wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a roadmap for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, showing that with courage, compassion, and unshakable conviction, even the most exclusive doors can be thrown wide open. And that's the end of today's story. Now I want to hear from you. What lesson did this story leave with you? Drop your answer below. I can't wait to read them all. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our weekly stories. Until next time, stay blessed.